so-and-so got me something, then I need to get so-and-so something, and then it's got to be, if they get me this nice of a gift, then I need to get that nice of a gift, and it just becomes this whole thing where, you would think that the idea of giving gifts to people should be a blessing, but sometimes it can kind of come across as a curse. That you have this doom over you of what if somebody gets me a gift and I haven't gotten them something. So, maybe that's why stores are so busy on Christmas Eve, because somebody got a gift and they have to repay it all of a sudden. And Christmas time, I think, can kind of have that same kind of duplicity to it, where it is a season of joy, it's a season of celebration, it's a season that we get together with friends and family, and there are parties, and there are cookies, and there are all kinds of things. But then again, it could be a season of great stress and frustration, because it's a time of year that you get together with family, and you have to make cookies and wrap presents, and you have all kinds of stress and frustration with it, so it can have this blessing, but a curse. And it's filled with emotions. So let me ask you a question as we start out, and this is participation, so be ready to raise your hand. If you need to, shake it out a little bit so it's loose, because I know sometimes if I don't give you a warning, you won't join in. How many people are ready for Christmas? How many people are ready for Christmas to be over with? So it's kind of a weird situation, isn't it, when you look at it? You can look around the room, and some of you that are ready for Christmas, I know some of you, Bethany has been preparing for Christmas for 364 days. Am I right? Okay, she announced last December 26th that it's time for Christmas. Okay, so I don't think you can ever damper her Christmas spirit. She is a ball of Christmas energy. But other people, you're sitting there thinking, they got Christmas trees out in July. Can you believe that it's here? That starting all over again. But when you look at it, how many people love that Bethany has got this great joy and spirit of Christmas? And if you feel that way too and you're drawn to it, you're going to be like, I'm going to hang out with Bethany. Why? Because she gets me. Right? She's not going to hang out with a Scrooge on Christmas because she wants to be with the people that get her. Right? Now, if you're on the other side and you feel like, man, it's just so many hard things about Christmas, and so many difficulties, so many struggles, so many frustrations, and you look out, and maybe you looked at the hands of people raised their hand that said they were ready for Christmas to be over, and you almost felt like, wow, good. There are other people that can feel the same way I do. They get me, right? They get me. That's one of the amazing things that we sometimes forget about Jesus, is he gets us. He understands frustrations. He understands stress. He understands hunger. He understands things that we sometimes forget because he's God, right? How could God understand me? How could he understand my weakness? How could he understand my temptations? How could he understand these things? But he came to connect us back to God, and the only way he could do that was through connecting with us. Jesus came to connect to us so we could connect to God. How do I know that? We've been looking at a couple different passages, from Isaiah and from John chapter 1. But if you go back to Isaiah chapter 9, there's a prophecy. A messenger of God, Isaiah, was given this message from God about this Savior that was coming. And it says, a child will be born to you. And it gives these names. And we've been looking over this last month at some of those names. Mighty God, Prince of Peace. Sound familiar? You just sang them. A couple of those names are very relational and connectional. Connectional, is that a word? Somebody's translating the service right now into Spanish, so, I'm going to, Aaron, I hope connectional comes across to you, okay? But it connects us relationally, and it's everlasting Father. and Wonderful Counselor. We have a wonderful counselor. You know, that word wonderful, I mean, I don't know if anybody's ever said, you know, you've ever used it. You know, how you doing? Wonderful. What does that mean? Maybe not so good? You know, how is everything? Wonderful. You know, it's a word like awesome that we kind of overuse, so we've taken the power out of wonderful, full of wonder. But when you read Wonderful Counselor in this passage in Isaiah 9, this is what it meant. It meant, wonderful meant beyond our understanding, incomprehensible. This counselor that we had is beyond our imagination. He's awesomer than awesome. That's who the Wonderful Counselor is. That's who this baby Jesus was meant to be. And he was a counselor. You know, a counselor is, we think of a counselor as that guy you lay down on the couch and tell him about your mother. You know, I mean, but that's not the counselor in the sense that he's talking about here. This is an advisor, a guide, an instructor, somebody who is giving wise counsel with authority. I tell people, think of it this way. Think of it like King Solomon. If you remember King Solomon, he was King Solomon the wise because God told him he could ask for anything. And what did he ask for? Wisdom. Let me have wisdom. And God granted him this immaculate wisdom to be able to decide. But not only did he have the wisdom, he had wisdom and the authority behind the wisdom. That's what counsel is. This is not your buddy telling you, suck it up, or your girlfriend saying, aw, it'll be okay. This is somebody who is giving you wise counsel, is offering real solutions to real problems. And Jesus, the Wonderful Counselor, as much as it may be hard for us to understand or fathom, he understands our problems. He understands them maybe more than we could even think or imagine. If you look with me in John chapter 1, we've been kind of working through John, the first part of John 1 this month, because I told you, if you look at Luke and you look at Matthew, those Gospels, those parts of Jesus' story of his birth, they tell you all about what happened. They told you about Mary and Joseph and, no room for them, for the baby and for the shepherds and the angels. And you have all of these things about what happened. But John talks about, I believe, the birth of Jesus, but you don't get much from him about what happened because he's talking more about why it happened. But here in John 1, verse 14, it's probably one of the most famous verses from John 1. He kind of talks in a combination about both what happened and why it happened. So in John 1:14, I'm going to read from the New International Version today. It says, the Word, remember, the Word is another name for Jesus. We established at the very beginning that John is using the word synonymously for Jesus. So he says, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. And that's all we're going to cover today is just that one verse, because there's a lot packed into those couple sentences that you have there. The word Jesus became flesh. That's just basically, it's a picturesque way of saying he was born, Jesus, God, was spirit, and here he comes in the form of flesh as a baby. Little baby Jesus, God in the flesh. Why did he come in the flesh? Jesus in the flesh meant that he could understand us. I mean, we deal with, on every single day, we deal with hunger, we deal with pain, we deal with different things that the flesh brings us, temptations that the flesh brings us. If Jesus never came in the flesh, he could never understand that. Literally, this picture of the words that are translated, he came in the flesh and made his dwelling, you could say that the same word picture was used to say, he pitched his tent and took up residence. He made it his home. For a season and a time, he took up residence here with us so that he could understand us. Anybody ever watch the show Undercover Boss? A couple people. I think it's still on. I don't know if it's just in reruns or not, but this whole premise is they get these CEOs and top-level executives of these companies, and they'll disguise them and put them down on the ground level with the workers that are supposed to be doing the work and doing the job. And what they're trying to do is to try to, get them this experience of seeing from their, from the executive desk down to the grunts that actually are doing the work. And when I've watched it, I think sometimes the executives, the CEOs and everything that get into it, they kind of go into it with this mentality that I'm going to get to see those lazy workers and figure out why, production isn't better than it was, and I can put my wisdom into this, and I can make it better because I understand what they're doing on the ground level. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes they find some flaws in their system and in their employees and everything like that. But more often than not, when I've watched the show, what ends up happening is the executive, the CEO, wakes up and gets this revelation of, man, there's a lot of hardworking people that sometimes are struggling through some very difficult circumstances to produce the results that they're producing for our company. And they go away with a greater level of understanding. And I would even say the employees probably look at them then and say, wow, they get me. They understand me. That's what, I guess maybe Jesus coming in the flesh was our immaculate undercover boss. Coming down and letting us know that he could understand us. Not that he needed that, but we needed that. We needed to understand that. That when he lived with us, when he lived among us, when he experienced everything, he could understand and have compassion. If you look in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15, it talks exactly, the author talks exactly about this. He says, for we do not have a high priest. Again, this is a name for Jesus. When he's referring to a high priest, he's talking about Jesus being our great high priest. It says, we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet without sin. Jesus was born in the flesh, in the world, in all of the difficulties. In fact, Jesus was born into a fairly difficult situation. I don't think we understand completely. Jesus, we have our little depiction up here, and maybe you have a nativity scene at home, right? With the little barn. We got one that you probably drove past. Well, you didn't probably, there's the only way to get to church. You drove past it when you came in here. If you didn't drive past it when you got in here, you teleported, and then we have a whole other conversation. But there's a little nativity scene, and you see shepherds and animals, and you see this little wooden box, and it seems so quaint. But you know why Jesus was born into that? Because his parents didn't have any money. They didn't have any money to secure a better place for them to have this child. They basically had to take whatever they could, and whatever they could was to put their baby into a trough that they used to feed animals. And I guarantee you, the manger did not smell like nutmeg and ginger. Think about what it smells like. It was not pleasant. Why? Because Jesus was poor. So if you sit there and you say, well, Jesus, he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, right? That's what the Bible tells me. Jesus, he's above all this. He has all the treasures and wealth and everything like that. He understands what it means to work with your hands for a living. He understands you. He understands what you go through. He understands your temptations. He understands your struggles. That wonderful counselor understands that you have problems because he experienced them too. He had that same connection to be able to, he came to people with problems. But here's the thing. There's one thing to come to people with problems. But Jesus didn't just come so that he could understand we had problems. Our wonderful counselor came to fix our problems. He did. He came so that he could fix our problems. How many people here have ever had a flat tire in their car? Most of you that drive. You know, now imagine, if you, this is kind of a funny illustration, I guess, but imagine somebody comes up alongside you with a flat tire. They get out of their car, they look at it, and they say, "Yep, you got a flat." I got a flat once. Let me tell you the story about the time I got a flat. I got a flat. I was out on a country road, and there was nobody around, and my tire was flat. Just like your tire's flat. I can understand how you could feel with that flat tire. Sure is too bad you have a flat tire. What's wrong with that? Well, the reality is, it's somebody that says, I can understand, I can tell you the whole story, I can connect with you and say, I can relate to you having a flat tire because I've had a flat tire. But what he stops short of doing is helping or telling you, giving you the wisdom that you need to fix it. Well, we have a wonderful counselor that provides us wisdom so that we don't have to live just in our problems. We can live past our problems because he will give us wise counsel. That's what John is saying when he says he came from the Father full of grace and truth. You want the truth bomb? Here's the truth bomb. We all have problems, yes? Some of those problems are with finances, with relationships, with health. Some of those problems are outside of our control, and some of those problems we've created ourselves, haven't we? Bam, there's the truth. The truth is we have problems. Now, sometimes those problems, you could say, are sin. We're doing not what God has called us to do. We have sinned, and that's caused a problem. It has caused a relational rift between us and God. You want to know why Jesus came? To fix our problems. To fix our problems, and ultimately that biggest problem. But here's the thing is, he didn't just come in truth, because if he just came in truth, the truth is we've got problems, and we have problems that we can't fix. No matter how hard we try, no matter what we do, we have problems we just can't fix. But he can. You know what that is? That's grace. He came from the Father full of truth and grace. He doesn't hold it against us. I need a wisdom. I need something from him that nobody else can give me. He lived a perfect life. He was tempted in every way, yet Hebrews said yet he didn't sin, and that made him the only one that could be that fix, that intermediary between me and God, and fix that. But here's the thing is, I needed that wisdom and that counsel, but I didn't deserve it. We don't deserve it. The only way that we can have it is through grace. And you know what grace is? A gift. And guess what? If you have to repay it, it's not a gift. Somebody go tell Sheldon. If you have to repay it, it's not a gift. Now, it's in our psyche, in our way of thinking, in our mentality that we give gifts, and gifts are supposed to be reciprocated. You want to make sure that everything's fair for the grandkids. Everybody, you get the same amount of gifts for the same amount of money for all of the grandkids, because that's what gift giving is all about. It's about being fair, right? If gift giving was about being fair, none of us all deserve none. You know? That's just the whole point of it. But Jesus doesn't hold anything against us. He gives grace freely. He gives a gift. James chapter 1 verse 5 says, if any of you lacks wisdom, counsel, remember? If any of you lacks this, if you need this, this is what he says. Let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, without finding fault, and it will be given to him. We have a wonderful counselor that came to fix our problems. He was full of grace and truth. So what? I just got done with doing a show down at the Mansfield Playhouse. It was a Christmas show. And the second to last performance, we did 7 shows, and the second to last performance, I was playing this husband that was stuck at a train station in New Hampshire, and my wife was in California, and at one part in the second act, I call her to kind of make amends for a relationship that we have, and so we're having this conversation. We're both on stage, but we're pretending we're on the phone, okay? So we have this phone call that's going on, and while I'm on the phone call, we've rehearsed this for a couple months. We've done this several times by now. I mean, we just had the lines down. You almost had them to the point you didn't have to think about them. I said my line, and then there was just a pause beat there, and instantaneously I knew she forgot her line. Why did I know this? Because normally she would have jumped right in, she would have been there, and it was off, and I knew, and I knew that she was lost. And you know what? Part of the reason I knew it, because I'd been there. Not in this show necessarily, but in other shows that I've been in, I've been at that place where I just, for some reason you just went blank. It's the joy of live theater. Because you have those moments and you have to figure your way out of them. And here she was in this moment, and it was probably only a couple seconds. Nobody in the audience that was there that night probably could even tell that she forgot her line, but I knew. And so I kind of, and I knew what she was going through, and I knew as soon as I understood that that's where she was at, I knew she wasn't going to find her way back. So I threw out a lifeline, and I kind of switched her line around and threw it back at her, so that she would get where we were and get back on track. And within a couple lines, we were right back in it, and we were able to finish the scene. And honestly, I would imagine that nobody in the audience would have known, that didn't know the show and didn't know, but I guarantee you, she was sitting there in those 2 beats where she went black, and she told me this afterwards. She thought it was like half an hour that she was sitting there just looking dumb, But because I had been on stage, because I had had the experience of it myself before, I got her. I understood, and I understood that this was my turn to save her because somebody had saved me before. We have a wonderful counselor. He doesn't need saving. He's perfect. He's Jesus. He's God. We have a wonderful counselor that can understand and relate to our problems and our issues and our struggles. We have a wonderful counselor who comes not only understanding us, but with a way and a solution to get past them. Are you living in a world that is filled with guilt and shame over something? He can help you fix that. Are you living in a place where maybe you're buried between some kind of financial struggle and you don't know your way out? He can help you fix that. Are you in some kind of a relational struggle that you just don't think that there's a way out? Guess what? He can help you fix that. But ultimately, all of these have one central root. And it's that we have a separation in our lives where we are separate from God because of our chosen disobedience. He came to fix that. He came once and for all to fix that separation. All we need to do is trust the wonderful counselor. You know, those are just words, and I've said those words before, and honestly, you know, when I put my so what up there, I want it to be a nugget of truth that you can kind of take and put it in your purse or your man bag and carry out of here with you to do something with. Jeff, you got a man bag, right? Okay, good. You know, I want it to be something like that, but I looked at this, and I was struggling as I looked at this because I looked at it, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's really easy to say. I trust Jesus. I trust who he is. I trust him. I love Jesus and all of this, but you know what? I think we don't. I don't think we know what that word means. I think we like what that word means. I think we maybe could even say we appreciate what that word means. But I don't know if we really know what that word means. Let me unpack it a little bit. I think the first thing that we need to understand if we are going to trust the wonderful counselor is we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to be willing to say, I've got problems. I've blown it. I've made mistakes. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a gambler. I'm a liar. I refuse to be generous with everything God has given me. Yes, that's a sin. You know, I don't know what it is, but we often look at our problems, and what we do is we look at everybody else's problems and we say, better than them. At least I'm not doing X. At least I'm... But the reality is, unless we're honest with ourselves and with God about our problems, we can't trust him. Because here's the ticket. God's not going to fix your problems. He's going to fix you. He's going to make you better. He's going to make you different. He's going to make you, the Bible says, new. But unless we're honest with ourselves, we can't trust him. Second thing is, we have to want to be healed. We have to want our problems to be fixed. And that might seem like a silly question, but it really is not as silly as you think. In fact, Jesus, when he was ministering on earth, he came upon this lame man once and asked him the oddest question. It's a man that was lame. He couldn't walk. In that culture, it meant that he basically was a poor beggar because he couldn't provide for himself. And you know what Jesus asked him? One question. Do you want to be healed? Because if you don't want it, you can't receive it. And you could sit there and you could think, well, why wouldn't this lame man want to be healed? Why wouldn't I want to have my problems fixed? Why wouldn't I want this rift in my relationship with God to be mended? Well, here's the thing, is sometimes the comfort we have with our discomfort is better than the discomfort we would have with something new. Sometimes we're more comfortable in our disobedience than we will be with the change. And we live for comfort. We have to be honest about our problems. We have to want to be healed. And thirdly, this is probably the hardest one step of trusting in the wonderful counselor. And this is true of any counselor, really. If you have gone to a counselor and they have given you advice, they would tell you this, that my advice is worthless unless you do this. Do whatever he says. Be honest with yourself. Want to be different. Want to be changed. And do whatever he says. Why is that so hard? Because Jesus asked us to do some pretty crazy stuff. You know, a blind man, he spit in the ground and made mud and put it on his eyes and said, go wash off in the pool to be healed. He looked at a rich man that was very wealthy and he said, go sell everything you have and give it to the poor. Then you can find that life that you're looking for. Because right now, money's holding on to you too hard. Jesus asks us sometimes to do pretty crazy stuff. Maybe he's challenging you in your finances and he's telling you that you need to be generous. And you're like, Jesus, you don't understand. You understand, Jesus, what it's like to be poor. Jesus, I can't afford to be generous. You don't understand, Jesus. If you want to trust the wonderful Counselor, if you want to celebrate the Jesus of Christmas, you need to be honest with yourself. You need to want to change. And we need to be willing to do whatever He says. Now, I want to just kind of end on one caveat. Because a lot of times we sit there and think, you know what? I can do that. I can be honest with myself. I can want to be changed, and I can do whatever He says, as long as whatever I need comes like that. But sometimes God's answer is not in the solution, but in the process to the solution. Sometimes God answers not in minutes or hours, but in days and weeks. Sometimes God's answer isn't just taking away an infirmity. Sometimes His answer is being with us in the infirmity. His presence with us is the greatest gift we have. So as we come to the end of our service, we're going to come to the table, come to the communion table, the Lord's table, and we're going to celebrate the fact that Jesus sat with His disciples, and when He sat with them and He gave them these elements, gave them the bread and the cup, He said to them, whenever you take these things, do it, what? Remembering me. And you know what He said to His disciples before He left to sit back on the throne in heaven? He said, I will be with you always. The wonderful Counselor will be with you, and His presence is with us always. And when we come to the communion table, it is a moment to remember that the wonderful, incomprehensible, wise Counselor and Guide is with us. I'm going to ask the ushers to come forward to help pass out the elements. Pedro, if you'll come up and help me pass out the elements to the ushers. As the worship team just leads in this song, I just ask you to take a moment and think about those things in your life that you're struggling with, and just ask yourself, are you ready to trust the wonderful Counselor? And as we take the bread and cup together, once it's all passed out, we invite you to make that be a symbol of your trust in Him.